Peace be with you. For those of you that I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Ira Waltz, and I'm proud to say that I'm principal here at Deering High School. I also want to acknowledge other members that help fulfill our mission. We have Dr. Ahmed, who's an incredible assistant principal and plays many, many, many roles here at Deering High School. And we have Mr. Gomez here and Sarah Schmidt here, who are teachers, leaders, who help fulfill our mission of college career ready and globally competent. Deering High School is a unique place in that we have 945 students who speak 60 different languages and come from 47 countries, with a large percentage of our students and families coming from Somalia. At Deering, we have created a respectful environment that honors and supports diversity. We truly are all one school. We have an international studies focus where learning has no borders. Our mission at Deering High School is to graduate students who are college and career ready and as well as globally competent. As a member of the International Studies School Network, DHS offers opportunities such as this event tonight and an international studies curriculum to help students become globally competent. The skills associated with becoming globally competent are to investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas to an authentic audience, and take action. Today's opportunity will reinforce the investigation of the world by investigating Somalia during the student-moderated question and answer session. Moderators for this session are Amran Mohammed in grade 11 and Deeka Nur in grade 12. Deeka is a native Mainer like myself. We take great pride in that. Both of these Deering High School students have parents that have immigrated from Somalia. The questions used today were developed by our own DHS Human Rights class. We will reinforce recognizing perspectives by having Ambassador Schwartz share his perspective regarding Somalia in the areas of politics, immigration, and humanitarian aid. On June 27, 2016, Ambassador Schwartz became the 13th U.S. Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Somalia, becoming the United States' first ambassador to the African nation of Somalia in 25 years. He was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and speaks French and Spanish. Ambassador Schwartz graduated from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, with a bachelor's degree in business administration. He received a master's degree in African Studies from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. He also earned a master's degree in National Security Strategy from the National War College in Washington, D.C. We will reinforce communication to an authentic audience through this event. And the audience today would have representatives for Senator Collins and Congresswoman Pingree, members of the Portland City Council, Portland Public School Board, Portland Central Office, and our Deering High School community, and the larger community, especially our Somali community. Thank you for joining us this evening. Finally, take action. At Deering High School, we are instilling in our students and staff a sense of efficacy, or that I can make a difference in myself, my family, my school, my community, the United States, and the world at large. I challenge you to be thinking in your lives, how can you make a difference when you leave here today? It is my pleasure now to introduce Ms. Sarah Schmidt, a teacher leader that brings our mission to life. She will share more about our school. Thank you.
I will be brief because we're eager to hear from the ambassador. But I think Mr. Waltz feels it's unseemly to brag about Deering, so I'm going to brag about Deering for you. Our school is, he alluded to some of these things, but our school is 12% Somali, so some hard numbers there. And we are indeed a global school. Annually, we host the Justice for Women lecture series, and we just had Zaina Anwar visiting in that capacity. We've hosted a panel on the role of religion in global issues. We had an imam, a bishop, and a rabbi. We have an active and activist human rights class and club to which Mr. Waltz referred. All our students must take a global issues class. We offer Mandarin, we offer Arabic, we offer a world religions elective. our debate team, our academic decathlon, our literary magazine, our theater department all won awards this year. And finally, our graduating seniors this year will be heading both to local Maine schools such as SMCC and USM, but also to Dartmouth, Johns Hopkins, and Brown. So we're very proud of Deering High School. And this is quite a feather in our cap to have an ambassador visiting us. Mr. Waltz already gave you a little thumbnail bio, but it's interesting to note that Ambassador Schwartz has served in Burundi, correct me if I'm wrong, the Seychelles, Cameroon, Kenya, and Zambia before assuming the role in Somalia. So please welcome Ambassador Schwartz.
Well, thank you all very much. This is quite an honor for me to be here, and I'll say a surprising opportunity when I got the assignment to be ambassador to Somalia. I was at that time unaware of what the Somali presence was in the United States, although I'd heard about a community in Minneapolis. But as I learned, I learned, of course, that there's a sizable community in southern Maine. And one thing that I've done as ambassador is to make regular trips back to the United States expressly to go and meet with diaspora communities around the country and local officials and community members where there are Somalis, to understand better from the Somalis what their interests are as Somalis and as Somali Americans, and also in those communities to get a better understanding of how integration is working, how the Somali contribution to the United States is developing and being played out. And I'm especially pleased that there's representatives from members of Congress and the Senate here. I've had many good meetings with members of Congress about Somalia and found quite a bit of support for Somalia and for what the United States is trying to do in Somalia and with Somalis, and really welcome all that support. But I really thank you, Principal Waltz and Sarah, for the introduction. I will just turn it over, I think, to my colleagues here and respond to questions as best I can. And I'm happy to take any unscripted questions from the audience if there's time. Thank you for having me.
So, once again, welcome. We're very glad to have you here. So, as Principal Waltz mentioned, these questions are generated by Deering students, and the first few questions are based on politics. So, as you know, the United States has been involved in Somalia for quite a long time. What are the results of the U.S. involvements? How could the U.S. have done a better job helping Somalia become stable? And are there other key players aside from the United States that are helping support Somalia?
Thanks for the hard questions. I don't know how far back in time to go. But I will say, in learning about our relationship with Somalia over time, I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, I mean, Somalia, they said Mogadishu was sort of a jewel on the Indian Ocean. It was a sort of a beautiful, thriving city, and we had a very large U.S. Embassy presence there. We still own a piece of land in downtown Mogadishu that's 179 acres. I mean, it's big, and that was where our former embassy was. We're not there now. Hopefully, at some point, security will be good enough for us to return. But I mean, we've had this up and down relationship with Somalia, I think, and when the Civil War broke out, and you're all familiar with Black Hawk Down, it was, one could say, the nadir, the low point of our relationship, and we were then absent for quite a while. But Somalia was also rather inhospitable to us and anyone else. It has, over the last 15, 20 years, slowly but surely been putting itself back together again. And I think the U.S. role has, I want to say, contributed to that a bit, but it's also grown along with the sort of legitimacy of government authorities. So we recognized the Somali government in 2013. We named an ambassador for the first time in 25 years. I think in 2000, I'm already confused, 16. And there was just another election now, which was more representative than the one in 2012. So I think, I mean, the truth is that only Somalis can stabilize and move Somalia forward. What the United States can do and other countries can do is to help them. And so it depends first and foremost, I think, on the will and the ability of Somali leaders to really want to move forward. And there is quite a bit of that right now. I mean, I think now is a great opportunity for Somalia. They've elected a popular and I think quite capable president who's appointed an equally capable prime minister and cabinet, which has been confirmed by the parliament. They were only confirmed 2 weeks ago. It's a little early to judge them on performance. But I think that all the indications are that this is the best opportunity in decades for Somalia to really start building the institutions it needs to help the Somali people and to really start functioning as a country. And it needs everything. It needs a constitution. It needs to start raising revenue so that they have money to pay government employees and invest in services. It needs security. It needs reconciliation from 30 years of various types of internal conflict and civil war. But these things are all on the agenda, and I'm confident that if this government is given the 4 years mandate that they have, that they will make substantial progress in all of these areas to some greater or lesser degree. The United States wants to partner with Somalia to help them where we can and where that's welcomed. We're currently helping quite a bit on the security side and looking to even do more there. You know, one thing that we've pushed and it is the Somalis are making a lot of progress on is sort of redesigning the national army, which has been completely ineffective over the last years, but they're literally, as we speak, in the process of reformulating it so that it's more representative and has more support from leadership across the country. We're helping on humanitarian assistance, which you might get to later, but I mean, right now, over half of the population is food insecure, with about a quarter of the entire population needing food aid to live right now. And we are the biggest provider by far of humanitarian assistance, which is primarily in the form of cash transfers to people, which is much more efficient and cheaper than sending food. And that's going by mobile money, by phones, or by vouchers. But what it says is that there is food available on local markets, so we're actually contributing to the local economy as opposed to undermining it. But also it means that we don't have to, or the humanitarian organizations don't have to deal with Al-Shabaab, which is a foreign terrorist organization, to try to negotiate access of food to needy people. The cash transfers can happen outside of Shabaab's control, which is much better. There's no way for them to steal the food, to tax the food, to get credit for the food. So, we are helping. We will look to do more if it's welcome and if we can. But I'd say the prospects are good, although I don't want to underestimate how hard it is. I mean, there's a lot of entrenched interests that have grown up in Somalia over the last 25, 30 years who have profited and done well from the insecurity, whether they have private security companies or they're in business without any regulation or oversight at all or what have you. So there's going to be a lot of forces to overcome, but I'm confident that a lot of progress will be made. As for others that are helping Somalia, There's a lot. The United Nations has a huge presence there in many realms, and they're playing a very helpful role. The United Kingdom is very much invested, and they're hosting a conference in May on Somalia that Prime Minister May will chair, along with the United Nations Secretary General and the Somali President. Turkey has been very involved since 2011 when the Turkish president went to Somalia during the last famine and really energized quite a bit of support, particularly from the Islamic world, for Somalis. And they now have their largest embassy in the world in Mogadishu downtown, and they're about to open a huge military base, training facility really to train Somali army. The United Arab Emirates is very invested in Somalia, and the neighbors play a big role, Kenya and Ethiopia as well. So there's a lot of international interest and I think support, and we work very well with all of those countries I mentioned.
Next question.
So the next question, what new and different approaches is the new government in Somalia implementing to help stabilize the country?
Well, one thing I mentioned was this reform of the National Army. They have not had an effective army for 30 years. And so they're taking on the challenge of basically redesigning it so that the soldiers come from a more representative group of clans and geographic areas, and that they're more responsive to political leadership so that people feel that the forces will actually work for government and not against it. And that the membership, being more representative of local communities, would be more welcome there. That right now you have many of the forces that are from clans that are nowhere represented in that area, and they're seen really as a hostile or invading force. So all that is in the process of being reformed. Another thing that they're doing is that they've staked out a very strong anti-corruption position. For the first time ever, they've made members of the cabinet sign sort of asset declarations of what they own now, so that at the end of their tenure, or at any point during their tenure, if they start showing some conspicuous wealth that they didn't have at the beginning of their tenure, they can be held to account. And I'm expecting, although it's very soon, I'm expecting that some people who are widely believed or known to be corrupt will be dismissed or possibly even arrested. But when you get down to it, I mean, the real challenge in Somalia and what's needed is governance, really. And that what you find in many places, and I've worked on Nigeria for a while, I've read about Afghanistan, in many places where you have widespread corruption, it just feeds extremism, because it's stealing from the public, basically, and they see it. And when it's to grotesque degrees, people are kind of outraged. And the worse corruption is, the more likely you are to have extremist groups. And so one of the best things that government can do to weaken Al-Shabaab or whatever support there might be for it would be to cut down on corruption and start to deliver security and services for the people themselves.
So the third question is, what do you see as the best way the U.S. can support Somalia today?
I think in some of the ways I've described, I think we're helping on security. We're helping to reform and build, I think, an effective clan-integrated Somali National Army. We're helping build police force, although to a lesser degree on the police. Others are doing more on the police, like Italy and the European Union. The humanitarian assistance is literally life-saving every day. We've got some programs that are attracting investment and creating jobs locally in key industries like fisheries and livestock and agriculture. We have what's called a stabilization program, so that when the African troops or Somali troops can clear al-Shabaab out of a community, out of a village, let's say, that there are people that can go into that village and help them sort of restart governance and things. So they will help, locals identify their own leadership, and then there's small seed money for them to start community projects of their choosing, whether it's a clinic or a school or a market or what have you, to try to get things moving, and it's extremely popular. So those are some of the things that we're doing now, and if we could move into other areas, I think maternal and child health would be right up there. The indicators are for maternal health and for children's health it's among the worst in the world. In fact, I found something on the internet. It had the top 10 causes of death in Somalia, and none of them would be in the top 10 in America. All of them are, in effect, preventable. It's measles, or diarrhea, or war, maternal issues, malnutrition. And we've signed an agreement to start an education program as well. Right now there's very little public education, but beyond that there's a lot of private education, mostly religious-based, but the challenge is that there's no standard, no national curriculum at all. And so there's no, Somalis don't really know what people are learning and what they graduate with. But they do know that they need a pool of people with a certain skill set. And right now they don't have the capacity to generate that on their own.
So our next question is on immigration. As we know, there are hundreds of thousands of Somalis in the United States. How will Trump's executive order affect Somali Americans and their relatives in and outside of Somalia?
Yeah, in practice, the judges have stated the implementation of the executive order, so that in practice, there's been very little impact. In looking at this, when the first one was issued, I was surprised to learn that we issue very few visas to Somalis, at least non-immigrant visas, or for tourists or what have you. In part, I think, because we don't accept the Somali passport yet, although we're looking at doing so at some point. And also not having an embassy in Somalia, it's more difficult for Somalis to apply for a visa. So in fact, I think in 2016 we only issued 102 non-immigrant visas. 60 of them would have been exempt anyway under the executive order because they were for officials. And in fact, under the revised order, many of the other 42 would have been exempt because they were coming on U.S. government-sponsored, travel. So I think in terms of the non-immigrant visa, the impact has been really almost, zero. In theory, there could be a bigger impact on the refugee admission. I think the number of refugees, the ceiling has been reduced, I think, to 50,000. But so far, and until today, I think the number of Somalis receiving immigrant visas to come as refugees has been more or less uninterrupted. And it was literally interrupted, but the numbers have been made up. So,
So last question is based on humanitarian aid, and you sort of went through some of it, but I'll ask anyways.
Sure.
So what role should the United States assume in providing humanitarian aid to the drought-affected regions of Somalia today?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I did talk a bit about, the assistance that's coming, both monetarily and in terms of food. But the other thing that ought to happen, whether the U.S. does it or if others do it, is to try to build a more resilient agricultural and livestock sector, possibly in the kind of crops that are grown, or in where people are living, or helping restock their herds, so that when the next drought comes, and it will, that they're better able to cope. Clearly ending the war with Al-Shabaab would be the single biggest thing. I mean, if people were more able to move freely, because, they know they've been doing this for thousands of years. They know when rainfall and water are scarce, they migrate. It's historically a nomadic culture. And they'll migrate to areas where there is more fertile soil or more grass or more water. But when Al-Shabaab's there, it all becomes more difficult. Shabaab often will steal livestock herds, whether it's camels or goats. And so ending the conflict and allowing people freer mobility would be huge as a coping mechanism.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you for answering the questions. Now we can open it up to the public, so if you have questions for the ambassador.
Yes, I was just wondering, you mentioned a little bit about agriculture, but what other economic opportunities do you see in Somalia?
So Somalia used to be a significant agricultural exporter, and the riverine areas were quite fertile and productive. That is not happening now because of the conflict. It's mostly area held by Al-Shabaab. So that would absolutely be one. Again, more livestock. One area that Somalis haven't developed is fisheries. They have a 2,000-mile coastline, the longest in Africa. And Somalis are not benefiting from any of the resources out there. Again, with peace and with governance, they can pass some laws and establish some regulation over things like oil and gas, which they have, but remains unexploited. So there's some of those don't create a lot of jobs, but they can certainly bring in money that can do other things for people. Somalis, not generalize, but let me just say many Somalis have shown themselves to be quite skilled at business. And you can see that in Nairobi, you can even see it in Mogadishu. And what they could do in a more hospitable and encouraging environment could be truly impressive. They've really taken almost a leadership role in the economy in Nairobi, Kenya. And so, I think there's a lot of areas where they could really grow the economy. But peace is really a prerequisite for a lot of it. Yes.
Just yesterday, our president withdrew all funds from the UN Population Fund, which, as you know, and many people here probably know, really supports safe birthing, family planning, rape prevention, and intervention following war. How is that going to affect a country that has some of the highest preventable deaths to women and children in the world?
The truth is, I don't have an answer to it. I don't know what that UN program is doing in Somalia, so I don't know what would be lost. I haven't heard of its programs. I know UNICEF is doing quite a bit. But Yeah, I mean, I think, personally, I think population's a factor. I mean, you have a youth bulge, throughout the continent, but certainly in Somalia. And I think 70% of the population is under the age of 30, and 70% of them are unemployed. So it's not hard for Al-Shabaab to find recruits when they're willing to pay people and give them a purpose. So, I certainly think it would be, in Somalia's interest to be able to have a population that matches its economy, if you will. But specifically about how the cut to this UN program would affect things, I just don't know. There's a lot of people involved, I think, in the social sector and in the health sector, probably far beyond what the UN might be doing. Although the UN in general is playing a significant role there, but I don't have a specific answer for it.
Hi, I heard you say that the embassy, the U.S. embassy, is no longer active in Somalia. So I'm wondering about your job and how you do it, and if you're on the ground there. And my second question is about careers, because I understand Deering had a career day today, and I was wondering if you could possibly talk about the path to becoming a career foreign service officer.
Wow, you're not even a plant. That's great. So we now lease a building on the grounds of the Mogadishu airport, which is like a whole world unto itself, I assure you. It's a strange place. But we lease a building there. It's the most secure building in Somalia. We're in the process of, the contractor we use, they're building another building, actually a bigger building, which, if we get the last bit of funding, should open in July. And so what we do now is we're based in Nairobi and we travel to Somalia. So I go to Somalia pretty much sort of like once a week for 1 to 4 days. And we have, I think between the State Department and USAID and the Department of Defense, maybe 30 Americans working on Somalia, and then maybe 25 Somali and Kenyan staff. And any number of us will travel in the course of, a day, a week. We always have anywhere from probably 2 to 10 sort of diplomats there, and then we have a security of about 8 people all the time. These numbers are going to double and triple when we get the second building open. And then there's a lot of other U.S. government people that come up who aren't assigned permanently to work on Somalia, like from the Department of Homeland Security. Somalia has agreed to take deportees from the U.S. So we've been returning large numbers of Somalis in the States illegally. It's a responsibility all countries are obliged to do. And Somalia has started to do that. To be fair, it began under the last government, but the charters have been happening in 2017. And it's a great thing for the United States. It's what we're supposed to be doing, and we're pleased that the Somali government's doing that. So Homeland Security is interested. The FBI goes up to do a number of things, both law enforcement and training. No doubt, other parts are interested. So we go in and out. We do hope, if things can work out, to start assigning people to Mogadishu in the course of the year, if we get the money and the authorities. And then hopefully as security improves in Mogadishu, we'll be able to leave the airport grounds and go and do more in the city. But it's even what we're doing now is much more than we were doing a year ago. And I think it's very well seen by the Somalis, just our greater presence, and it's paid dividends for us. So for the Foreign Service, and I would encourage anybody here to consider it as a career, it's an unbelievable privilege. If you're interested in international affairs, I mean, they pay me to do this. And I usually say that if I were independently wealthy, I'd do this for free. I mean, I don't know where else, I can go and, sort of live in another culture and, be paid to sort of learn about it and try to find opportunities to sort of help them and help us, and then meet all kinds of, interesting people. It's just a great career, and I've gotten to do many, many things that I could have never imagined, like the current job or sitting right here. No, really, it's fabulous. It's just fabulous. I mean, it's not, all just great. There's strains. For example, my family stayed in the United States while I'm overseas this time, mostly for my kids' schooling. Although Nairobi has really good schools, there's particular things with my son's education that we can do better in the States. So that's difficult on everybody that we're separated for 2 years. And sometimes just the whole, bidding on your next assignment, and there's never any guarantee what you're going to get. And when you're, single and starting out, you're a little more flexible. But as you acquire a family, and there's schooling issues, or spousal employment issues, or there might be health issues, things start to get a little more limited. But it's just it's all part of what we do, and it's for me it's more than worth it. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I would encourage anybody interested in in trying to make the world a better place and learning about the world as a life experience to really think about it. There's an exam that's open to anybody. I think it's free. It's offered several times a year, and people should try to do it. I'd never really heard of the Foreign Service until I was in my 20s. I joined Peace Corps, and while I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I met some American diplomats. I was like, huh. And then finally one of them, actually I was back in Washington, and I got a job at Peace Corps headquarters. And I was meeting once with, I forget what country it was, like Liberia or something. I was meeting with the State Department Liberia desk officer. And out of nowhere, he just said, why don't you join the Foreign Service? You can do this job. I said, what do you mean? And anyway, and then I meet other people, and at some point it dawned on me that, well, maybe I could do that. So, if there's any students here, I'm telling you 10 years before I learned about it. Go for it. Yeah.
A related question would be, what sort of skills and characteristics would our students who potentially would be interested in your line of work, what would you recommend to them that they should begin or continue to develop? And
well,
how?
I looked at the guiding principles of the program here, and it's quite impressive. I mean, if any student takes your sort of educational principles seriously, they're way ahead of the game. I mean, I was an average student, and I studied business undergraduate, and didn't really get the international line probably until the Peace Corps period. But one thing that's central, and you all have it, but I think it's an ability to be successful at this. I think an ability to, and a desire to want to understand how others think and operate. What's important to that society? What do they want? What do they fear? And then with that understanding, looking for sort of opportunities for win-win situations. Like, what is it that the United States would like to achieve with this country? What do they want to achieve for themselves? So where can we partner? I mean, it's a lot harder to get people to do things they don't want to do. But if you can find a way for them to see it being in their interest, for whatever sort of indigenous reason they have, then you're much farther along. So I think that sort of perspective helps. for the Foreign Service exam, and I think to be a successful Foreign Service officer, you need to know about the United States. You don't need to know everything about the United States, but you need to understand what the American experience is, if you will. A bit of our history, why our government is the way it is, we're structured the way it is, what are some of the key trends and events in our history, and sort of what makes us what we are in a general sense. I'd say that and English language skills. Because what we do is we communicate, whether it's orally or in writing. I was at the National War College for a year, and most of my classmates were U.S. military. And, there's a lot of foreign military officers there, and there's a lot of U.S. government civilians there. But, at some point I'd explain to them and say, well, look, you guys have this institutions built around sort of procuring and maintaining and using equipment, whether it's jet planes or cargo planes or tanks or submarines or what have you. And these are your, in effect, your weapons, I suppose. Our weapons are worked. And the State Department's not going to teach you English. They're not going to teach you to be a good communicator. You've got to have some of that already. You've got to know how to write a persuasive paragraph or a grammatically correct sentence. And you need to know something about the United States, because no matter your level in the Foreign Service, you're representing the United States, whether it's the day you're hired or 30 years later. And when that foreigner asks you a tough question about why the U.S. did this or what about that, your answer is just as important as the ambassadors. So you need to have some understanding of who we are collectively and why we do what we do. You don't need to be an expert on any particular country. You don't need to speak 6 languages. They can teach you a language. They can teach you about the country you're going to. These things don't hurt, but they're not requirements. That's all.
As you prepare to leave Maine, what will your takeaways be?
The lobster? I was saying to Stacy, who's a colleague who works on the Somali desk at the State Department. I was saying about how I think for both of us, visiting these communities around the United States is just a tremendous opportunity and a real reward for what I do. I've been to Minneapolis, St. Paul, I've been to Columbus, I've been to Seattle. I'm here, I'll go to Boston on Friday. It gets me to places around America, some of the places I've never been. But it also gives me more of a personal understanding of who these people are and what they look like today. I think Portland today probably doesn't look anything like what it did when I was born. And it's fascinating, and it's who we are now, which for me as a diplomat and as an American citizen is really important. And I think coming to Southern Maine, I think if I didn't know anything about Somalia or Somali immigration to the U.S., I wouldn't have guessed that Southern Maine had a large Somali population. So I think the interest that people in Southern Maine have shown in my visit, and here in Lewiston, and Auburn, to me, I find very, I won't say overwhelming, but very surprising and in a positive way, very impressive. I hope I'm not disappointing. So, I think just the real interest in getting the global perspective and welcoming me is really, to me, very positive.
question is about power and politics. So do you see any connection between Al-Shabaab's role in Somalia and the army of Somalia being not that an effective army?
That's a good question. You know, I think the army is not effective because people haven't wanted it to be. You know, African neighbors very generously sent troops to help Somalia beginning 10 years ago, beginning of Uganda. And they've been there for almost 10 years now. There's 22,000 African troops there from Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Burundi. And they have provided a good bit of security in Mogadishu, all the urban areas, and elsewhere. And I mean, I've had the impression, and many others have had, that as long as somebody's providing some security, well, we don't have to work too hard at it. But, you know, the African troops they want to go home. It's been enough time now for Somalia to develop its own. There's been a lot of corruption, which has impaired the development of an effective force. And there's been, I think, clan politics as well, that it's not a representative force. So it can't even be used in much of the country. But I think that's all about to change, which is a good thing. Shabab is not very popular. It controls a lot of territory. That's more a function of how weak government is than how strong Shabab is. And it does, where it governs, it has, I mean, it does provide a certain sort of reliable security, taxation, and justice, which are pretty important for people. And government in general has not been performing as well in those areas. When government does, no one will support Shabab.
What kind of work do you do on a day-to-day basis?
What kind of work do I do on a day-to-day basis? It really varies. I mean, when I'm in Mogadishu, which is, let's say on average, 2 out of 5 days a week, I'm sort of meeting either Somalis or other diplomats sort of all day long. Because I'm there, and it's really an opportunity for me to have my meetings with Somali officials and some civil society, members. We've done some great, actually, women's events. We did a great gender-based violence program a few months ago. So I love doing that there. So I spend most of my time sort of meeting with Somalis, a little bit coordinating with other diplomatic missions, other ambassadors and things. We did a lot of that during the electoral process, which was really long and messy. And we played a pretty active role in trying to encourage Somali officials to do the right thing. It was long and tedious, but in the end, they wound up electing, in a pretty clean process, a pretty credible president. When I'm in Nairobi, I'll do a little more internal stuff. I'll do internal meetings with different members of the mission, my mission, to sort of be sure that they know what I have learned and I know what they've learned, but also to sort of come to agreement on a regular basis on what we ought to be doing based on new information and new problems or opportunities. So there's sort of that, guiding the mission, and then on the Somalia side, a little bit more of the outreach and trying to learn and influence. I don't know if that's descriptive enough.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
I went in Somalia 2013 and I spent 3 months in Mogadishu. that time was not very safe, but I took 3 of my boys and my wife, and we spent there. As you mentioned right now, we have 22,000 African military, whether Uganda or Kenya.
Yeah.
There's a way, instead of spending all this, whether United States or European spending or United Nations spending all this money to these troops, there's a way, or you can address, or you can find a way to build a Somali military, because they know who they are, Shabab, and who they know the country, and they have the language, and they understand the culture and everything. There is a way to build a Somali military around 22. If you get a 10, 15,000 Somali military, I believe the country will be stable. Since 1990 up to now, it's very painful. People dying, even today, a lot of people die for a suicide bomb. And I think it's the only solution. I'm not bringing solution, but when I ask if there's a way we can build, or just building.
So you're entirely right. I mean, the only answer to this is for Somalia to provide for its own security. And it can do so at a vastly cheaper cost than it is to pay foreign troops to be in Somalia. The reason there's not an effective Somali security force all has to do with, Somali government dysfunction and lack of will. I mean, the government doesn't tax, really. It doesn't raise revenue, so it can't pay anybody to work for it, or can't pay for equipment, things like that. It hasn't created a force that is sort of, clan integrated, that's representative. The intelligence service, the police, all underfunded and not led at all levels as well as they could be. So it has to be Somali run. And I think the foreigners would love to leave, and I fully believe Somalia should be doing those functions. And hopefully this redesign and reform of the army is a good first step, and President Farmajo is completely committed to paying everybody who works for his government. And when he can start to pay them, I think he'll get better performance. So you're right, and hopefully some of that is beginning to happen now.
Thank you. At this time, we're closing this outstanding opportunity you provided us. I want to thank Amran and Dika for being our moderators this afternoon. And for Ambassador Schwartz, I have a small token of a much greater appreciation, which is our highly coveted and world-renowned plaque during high school at night. It is proudly displayed in China, Japan, Finland, Ecuador, and now hopefully Somalia. And when I look at Deering High School and I look at our students, they just bring me so much hope. So as you gaze upon this, I hope it brings you hope that we're creating world citizens here at Deering.
Thank you, Principal. This will be in my office in Mogadishu. 3 weeks.